What would happen if our emotions, our repressed thoughts and memories, our fragile psyches manifested and took physical forms? What would they look like?
Oh, God, Nola.
No, I disgust you. You hate me.
They'd probably be pretty gross and terrifying. Having had huge success in the horror genre with his first two low-budget feature films, Shivers and Rabid, Canadian director David Cronenberg continued to expand the areas that fascinated him within the horror genre. These were mainly the inner workings of us and the horror of the human body.
It's me, Cameron. I'm here.
But his next two films would add more of a psychological element and would particularly explore the relationship and the connection between the body and the mind, positing the idea that when pushed to its very limits, the mind can be just as grotesque, just as horrific, just as terrifying as the body. Join me as we continue our journey through the mind and body as we discuss David Cronenberg's The Brood and Scanners.
You're not looking at me, Mike. You're not looking at me in the eyes. That's weak.
Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. This series, we are looking at the mind and body in horror cinema, and this is part 8, in which, as that intro suggested, we are going to be giving you a double bill of David Cronenberg classics, The Brood from 1979 and Scanners from 1981. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. If you haven't seen these films, give them a watch. They're so much fun. And for any Cronenberg fans out there, just to let you know that we haven't just skipped Shivers and Rabid, his first two films. We have actually already covered those two films in our zombie series. So if you want to hear me and Rosie Fletcher discuss Shivers and Rabid in depth, you can still check that out. Head on over to our website, evolutionofhorror.com, and find our Cronenberg episode right there. Quick announcement to make before we get started, just to say that this week saw the announcement of the lineup of films for Fright Fest 2020. Now, usually, of course, every year Fright Fest host their big annual festival in London's Leicester Square, where we see sort of 20, 30, 40 different horror films across 5 days. Sadly, due to COVID, there won't actually be a physical festival this year, but they are hosting a virtual festival across the August bank holiday weekend. And, very excitingly, to kick things off on opening night, I am going to be hosting an Evolution of Horror / Fright Fest online pub quiz. So that is going to be part of the official Fright Fest lineup this year, and before the premiere of the first opening film of the festival, you can come along and get involved in my live streamed quiz. It will be absolutely free, and it will be hosted on our YouTube channel, EOH TV. That's youtube.com/evolution of horror. I will list all of the details to that in the show notes, but please do come along and get involved. Okay, let's get into our Cronenberg discussion then. I'm so excited to discuss these two movies, especially off the back of discussing Lynch and Eraserhead last week. I think all of these films complement each other so well. Joining me to discuss all things The Brood and Scanners, one of my very favourite people to have on the podcast. Not only is he a huge cinephile and a horror lover, he's also a bloody brilliant artist and illustrator. And I have to say that really because he designs all of the artwork for the Evolution of Horror website, and he designed that sexy new Evolution of Horror podcast logo that you're probably looking at right now if you're playing this podcast on your phone. I am very excited to welcome back the brilliantly talented Mike Lee Graham. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm all right. It's weird doing this not in person for once, isn't it? Sort of seeing you via Skype. How is everything? How's lockdown for you?
It's been, I'm embarrassed to say, perfectly fine. My day-to-day life hasn't really changed. I'm a hermit by nature. I work from home. So yeah, I really can't complain. We're all good over here. Yeah.
Nice. You've been doing some amazing stuff. I loved the Arrow video artwork that you did recently for that new release. What was that film again? The zombie one.
That was for Zombie for Sale, which is
that's it. Yeah.
Terrific Korean zombie comedy. I was just thrilled to have Arrow Video come and ask me to do something for them because that was a proper bucket list job, and it feels good to tick that off.
Yeah, I mean, it must feel like it's a bit of an accolade, isn't it? I mean, for us, horror fans, we love Arrow. I love that Arrow artwork. That must have been kind of a dream job for you in a way.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Every email that I've sent back to them has been, I've always finished with, hopefully we can work together again.
If you ever need any more.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, so let me ask you first of all a little bit about the sort of subgenres that we're dealing with for this particular season, sort of a mix of body horror and psychological horror. Are you a fan of these sorts of areas of the horror genre?
I love psychological horror. And I'm not as crazy about body horror, but I do love like monsters. And, for instance, I couldn't say I don't like body horror because one of my favourite films is The Thing. And that's got tons and tons of body horror in it. I suppose I don't like sort of gratuitous kind of torture porn body horror.
Yeah.
But the stuff that David Cronenberg does, for instance, these kind of things that happen to the body, it's incredibly affecting. So I don't love body horror, but I respect it a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about Cronenberg then? Are you a fan of Cronenberg's work?
I am a huge fan of David Cronenberg's work. Not all of it. I think it's I am actually just a huge fan of a few of his films. Yeah. I like his more recent stuff, but I much prefer the older stuff. And my favourite from Cronenberg is very, very obvious here, but The Fly.
Yeah, The Fly is...
So many people say The Fly, but I just love it.
Oh my God, it's just perfection, isn't it, The Fly? I think the one thing I find, we'll probably talk about this as we go on, I love Cronenberg as well. The thing that I like less about some of his films is that they sometimes are a bit cold.
Yes.
I think they're so sciencey and scientific that they can sometimes feel a bit distant for me, in the same way that Chris Nolan sometimes can do for me as well.
100%.
We've been drawing a lot of comparisons throughout this series between Cronenberg and Lynch, and I think I prefer the Lynch end of the spectrum where it's like high emotion, rather than kind of the cold logic, I suppose, of Cronenberg's films, if that makes sense.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's probably why I like The Fly and Dead Zone as much as I do, because there is a lot more emotion in those films. Yeah,
exactly. The Fly is actually a beautiful love story, I think, isn't it? That's the thing. It. Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum in it is so endearing and like such a lovable character, and it's one of those films where it's kind of like a tragic romance where you're heartbroken that it didn't work out in the end because he mutated with a fly.
Exactly, it is. It's stunning. And before we get into these two films, you'd seen Scanners before, had you? But was this a first-time watch for The Brood?
This was a first-time watch for The Brood, which I wasn't particularly prepared for.
I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
This, I swear, out of all of Cronenberg's films, this is the one that it's been a while since I've audibly gasped during a movie, and for me it is as much as like in The Fly, Goldblum's sort of body becomes so kind of weird and misshapen and stuff like that. This film, the sort of horror, the sort of body horror in it is more subtle. Yeah, but it's like fucking hell. It's just kind of. It looks so real, and it's just subtle enough where when you just see it on screen, it's like, fuck, what the fuck has happened to that person? It really visceral reactions from me for this one.
Yeah, I think actually Cronenberg, for me, when he's at his best, it's more disgusting and nauseating than, like you mentioned, torture porn and that kind of stuff. Even the most extreme gore doesn't make me wince as much as certain moments in Cronenberg movies do, you know, whether it's like Goldblum pulling out a tooth or, certain moments in The Brood or Shivers, the kind of like throwing up those horrible like penis parasite things, you know, like all of those like horrible bodily functions, just so gross.
He really knows how to hold back before showing something.
Yeah.
I was just sort of thinking about some of the acting in Scanners. I was thinking he weirdly the lead in Scanners kind of reminded me of David Cronenberg when he was in what was that Clive Barker film, Nightbreed?
Oh yes, yes.
And it's odd. Like, I sort of oddly sort of saw parallels between their kind of quite stilted acting.
Yeah,
and it made me think about, in terms of body horror, that sort of Clive Barker is like hit you over the fucking head with a mallet.
Yeah, but
with just, and after a while you sort of get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
But with David Cronenberg, it's like, you know, obviously he's got a medical background. It's like, it's just like a medical precision in what he does. And he knows just where to make the right cuts.
Oh, totally.
For maximum impact, yeah.
And I think, you're right. I mean, he came from a science background. I think he studied science at university in Toronto. And clearly, like, his obsession with science bleeds into all of his early work, doesn't it, I think? And yeah, there is something just really kind of, like you say, sometimes it takes its time, I think, with that grossness. And then when it hits you with it, it's really powerful and effective, I think. Yeah, and I think equally as well, I mean, we'll probably talk about this when we get into The Brood, but this is where this crossover comes, I think, between psychological horror and body horror as well, right? Because I would say that his movies also have a kind of Freudian psychological kind of angle to them as well a lot of the time, don't they?
He's obviously got a lot of interest not only in kind of scientific stuff, like, kind of the science behind the body, but also the science behind the mind. And there's still that same kind of, I mean, Scanners deals a lot with that. Also, The Brood is... Yeah, it's, the whole idea of kind of these really interesting kind of new techniques in helping people with mental health problems and stuff like that. We'll get into it, but obviously I just love Oliver Reed in pretty much anything he's in.
Yes, we are going to get into that, absolutely.
Sure.
Amazing. I was going to ask you, what's your sort of favourite film of his? So it is The Fly, is it?
It is The Fly. Yeah, I just, it's kind of one of those films that I took for granted for a little bit until I watched it again recently. I've watched it maybe 3 times. The first couple of times I watched it, I just I just wanted to see the special effects and the gore and things like that. And the last time I watched it with my wife Lucy, and we were like in tears. Over it, it was a genuinely emotional experience, and it's just, I just love kooky straight guys in movies, like lead characters, and it really, well, we'll get into the leads in The Brood and Scanners who don't have the sort of charisma that I need apparently, but Jeff Goldblum in The Fly is just amazing.
Perfection. Absolute perfection. I would agree with you. I think The Fly is probably my favourite as well. Although, have you seen Videodrome?
You know what? I was going to watch it the other day, but I didn't get around to it. I saw it once when I was 15 at about 3 o'clock in the morning on Channel 4. God bless it. They used to show the best stuff.
They did.
Back in the day. And I couldn't make fucking heads or tails of it when I was that age. And I thought I might be watching something like a little bit wrong. It's one of those films where you kind of want to watch films that you're not allowed to when you're that age.
Yeah, definitely.
But that was an instance where I sort of thought, oh, this is a little heavy for me.
Yeah,
I think I might go to bed.
Yeah, no, do you know what? It's well worth a rewatch. I think I've just, because we're covering it next on the podcast, and I seen it. It had been a long time since I'd seen it, and I had kind of fond memories of it, but also remembering that it was just a bit baffling and a bit weird for weird's sake, and something that I couldn't quite grasp when I was younger. Watching it this time round, holy shit, it absolutely blew me away. Spoiler alert for my discussion about it in a couple of weeks' time, but I just thought it was absolutely stunning. And in a way, David Cronenberg at his absolute peak, where, you know, between Videodrome and The Fly, and then perhaps Dead Ringers as well, these movies where he has as much of a kind of emotional and visceral and psychological heft as much as he does a kind of body horror heft. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's where he really balances all of the elements perfectly. Videodrome kind of feels like a bit of a Lynchian nightmare, which is what I loved about it, of course, and also felt super relevant to today. So yeah,
right, okay.
I loved it.
Right.
We're going to get into it on the podcast in a couple of weeks' time anyway, but Mike, give it a rewatch for sure.
Well, I've got, for my birthday this year, my wife Lucy gave me movie coupons, because we constantly argue about, you know, what film we're going to watch in the evening. I always want to watch some, like, bizarre sort of Japanese thriller from the fucking 60s or something. And, you know, we're often butt heads about it. And for my birthday, it was, like, probably one of the best birthday presents I've had. And it's just been amazing just to go, no, we will watch The Handmaiden. So I think I'll pull out Videodrome quite soon. Yeah,
that is a brilliant idea. I'm going to suggest that to Rihanna. That's a great idea, because we have the same. We have those arguments all the time over what to watch.
Yeah, spent a lot of hours on Netflix just browsing through stuff when we both want to watch completely different films, and there's no catharsis for that.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you can just spend a whole night just browsing and then just be like, well, fuck it, it's too late now.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
We weren't put on this fucking planet for that.
They come from the unknown, and they're here now, hiding, waiting to strike. You can feel their presence all around you. Never before have you come this close to the edge of terror. Never before have you faced anything so strange and sinister, so bizarre and unnerving. Never until now. David Cronenberg's The Brood.
The Brood is essentially about Oliver Reed, who is a doctor doing these really bizarre kind of, I don't know, kind of like therapy sessions with people, which brings out their kind of trauma through physiological changes.
Yeah.
And essentially it is about a woman who is a patient of his who is just wrapped in anxiety and anger about the breakdown of her marriage with her husband and potentially losing her daughter. And the sort of physiological manifestations of her anger are pretty fucked up. And I will get into it from there.
Yeah.
What happens for the next hour and a half is Cronenbergian fuckery.
Yeah.
And it's pretty great.
Yeah, it is in some ways the perfect combination, isn't it, of like the mind and body producing the horror. This woman's trauma combined with this kind of therapy she's undergoing creates this physical horror that we see on screen play out. It's pretty amazing. So this was your first time watching it. What did you make of it? What did you think of the film?
It's one of those films where I don't feel like it. I think some of my favourite types of movies are when it feels like no stone has been left unturned.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of stones were left unturned in this film.
Yeah.
But I've kind of gone away from the film like, I wonder what those stones were. Like, I want to find more. I want to know more about what was happening. You know, the kind of, was it cycloplasmics?
Yeah, psychoplasmics. Yeah.
Yes. Just a lot of really rich ideas in this film, but it's quite a short film. I think it was about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So it just ticks along, And, it doesn't over-explain itself, which is good. So it never gets like too boring or anything. But, with a film like this, I think there were some bits where I quite would have liked just, some exposition from Oliver Reed or something. Or, I could just have watched him monologued for about 30 minutes about what the film is about. Yeah. And then we could have just gotten back into it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, actually.
Yeah, it's I really like it as well. And again, I've now seen it twice, and I think maybe this is probably something with Cronenberg, same as I find with Lynch. Sometimes I like these films more upon second and third watch, and I really, really enjoyed this watching it again, actually. I think it takes its time. I think it saves its best stuff for the final act. So I'm going to have so much stuff that I love that I want to say about the final act, as I know you do as well, Mike. I mean, because we were texting about how brilliant that final 20 minutes is. But let's start with some of the other stuff first of all, just to lay the groundwork. I guess maybe we should start by talking about the performances, because what's really interesting about this film is that it opens with, that opening scene is this kind of weird, radical therapy session where we've got Oliver Reed's psychiatrist kind of performing this strange role-play therapy on a patient where he's pretending to be a kind of abusive father, and they've got this very weird kind of daddy-son thing going on in front of an audience, and he's making this patient cry and then making him kind of expose all of his physical scars. It's really interesting. What do you think of this dynamic, and what do you think of Oliver Reed in this film?
He's those eyes of his are just immediately just like they just capture your attention. I don't know how a lesser actor could have dealt with some of those scenes, because it's pretty weird.
Speak to me, show me. Don't tell me about it. I'm not interested in what little girls have to say anyway. Show me! Show me your anger! Show me, then I can understand it.
There you are, Daddy.
There's a certain number of actors out there that just are like charisma nuclear bombs. And they don't really need to act anymore. Yeah. Jack Nicholson's probably one of them, I'd say. They can just sort of basically get away with just being themselves on a film. And I think Oliver Reed has that quality about him. And because of that, you kind of believe that people that have been kind of like emotionally abused and stuff like that, they kind of need someone with that sort of charisma. And I could see myself like going for a trip to the Psychoplasmics and seeing if he could help me out. I believe it.
I know. It's amazing. I mean, that's it. Oliver Reed is perfect for this. We talked about him last series as well with The Devils, where again, he's this quite morally ambiguous priest, but you kind of love him and want to root for him. And I think it's that, like you say, Oliver Reed just oozes sex and charisma, and even in this film where he's playing what is essentially like a kind of he's essentially like a creepy cult leader, isn't he, really? And in that way that I think we would all follow Oliver Reed and drink his Kool-Aid, you kind of get that vibe in with the character that he plays in this, because even though at the beginning I really didn't trust this guy and I thought, okay, this doctor is clearly into some weird stuff, his unorthodox practices are what leads to the horrors in this film. But also, as the film went on, I kind of liked him, and I thought, he actually wants the best for Nola, his patient, doesn't he? So I thought that was really interesting. What did you think of him as a character?
Yeah, no, I liked that. I liked that there wasn't like a heel turn at any point, and it's sort of up to the viewer to decide whether or not he was in the right or wrong. I mean, his methods certainly didn't seem to work very well, so that's one thing. That's definitely a tick against him. It's I suppose there are a lot of examples in real life of people in like sort of the science community that have tried to do stuff that they thought was right, and was at the detriment of patients and of mankind and things like that.
So other than Oliver Reed, let me ask you about a couple of these other actors. Now, apparently David Cronenberg made this film after he had divorced his wife, and it was sort of a little bit of vaguely kind of him dealing with his own feelings about his own divorce. And he apparently cast the roles of Frank and Nola, this married couple. He described them as kind of vague sort of representations, like in terms of they sort of looked like David Cronenberg himself and his wife. So he chose this lead actor to kind of look a bit like him. But having said that, what do you think of that character of Frank, that main character? Because he is our protagonist, but he doesn't really do anything, does he?
So when I do, I typically struggle when I don't know why, but whenever you ask me to sort of give a quick synopsis of one of the films, I all of a sudden freeze. And I'm like, wait, what the fuck is this movie about?
What is it about?
I was out for a jog earlier, and I was thinking, right, okay, I'm just going to figure out what my synopsis for The Brood is. I'm just going to be able to bash this out. And every time I tried to start with the father as the main character and tried to lead the story that way, I was like, what the fuck does he do?
Yeah. Yeah,
what the fuck does
he
this
doesn't
guy
do
actually
anything.
Yeah, and it's like, maybe I'd remember his character a bit more if there'd have been more interactions between him and the wife. But there weren't that many, and he's a contractor. That's pretty much all I really remember, and he's obviously a father. But there's I think that's why like films like Dead Zone and The Fly jump off the map to me so much, because it's the leading men in it are much more charismatic, and unfortunately, I hate being sort of critical and mean, but I just wanted to spend more time at the hospital with Oliver Reed and the ex-wife. I'm awfully sorry, I've forgotten her name.
No, that's all right. The character is Nola.
Yes, Nola.
And she's played by Samantha Eggar. Yeah, Frank, who's played by Art Hindle. It's a really tricky one, and I didn't know whether that was partly that the actor was kind of a little bit wooden and non-charismatic, or if maybe just the character just wasn't that interesting as well. Like you say, other than the fact that he's a dad and he's an ex-husband, we don't really know much about him as a person or a character.
Well, my daughter's been beaten severely and scratched and bitten, and her mother did it. Her mother, who's under your psychiatric care.
That's an incredibly heavy accusation to make, Frank. Did Candace tell you that?
Candace won't talk about it. She pretends the whole thing never happened. But it was Nola, or some other crazy you have stashed away up here. Either way, no more weekends with Mummy. The kid stays with me.
I think also this is where Cronenberg often, he clearly he's a man that's full of ideas, and I think what he's doing here is deliberate. I think that he's saying something about gender and the role of the husband and the role of the wife in this film, because he's, like I said, he based this film loosely on his own emotions that he was processing through his divorce. And if you look at those two characters and the daughter, actually, if you look at this whole family, you've got the father, who is kind of a bit useless and a bit rubbish, and he's a bit nothingy. I mean, there's not really much about him. He's a bit cold. He's a bit inactive. He's a bit passive, he's not really the kind of hero that we want to watch throughout this film. In fact, the only time when we see him really be active is right at the end of the film, when he's strangling his own wife to death, which is interesting. Whereas when you look at Nola as a character, she is, in some regards, you could look at her as a bit of a reductive view of a female hysterical character, right? She is just this she's a bit of a hot mess, isn't she? Let's be honest. She is going through some stuff, and she's highly emotional. She's erratic. She has these kind of outbursts, and it's because of her that the horror is happening in a kind of indirect way. But maybe that's the point, is that both of these characters are these kind of archetypes of the useless husband that isn't doing anything to help save his wife, who is going through a huge amount of problems and trauma and stress and emotions, and she's got nobody there supporting her. And then you've got the little girl who is the one that's really in danger here, who is the true victim, who is kind of caught in the middle of it. And I think maybe there is a kind of really interesting family dynamic there, you know, like a family therapy session that, you know, David Cronenberg is working through in this film via these characters. But, you know, even though something can be very clever thematically, it doesn't necessarily make it very enjoyable dramatically. And I think you're right. I think the problem is with following this husband throughout the whole film as our kind of main character, as our way in. I don't really know what I'm supposed to feel about him, or whether I'm supposed to care about him or be worried about him, you know?
The problem is that I never at any point... I suppose if I had to make a kind of like a negative comment about the film, is I didn't feel like he was ever at risk.
Yeah.
And the daughter was very rarely at actual physical risk until right at the very end.
Yeah.
So the stakes were kind of lost on me a little bit. I didn't know what the kind of... obviously I knew what the kind of moving force of the movie was because it was affecting other people, these sort of manifestations of Nora. Nora. Nola. Nora, God. It's, you know, the problem, it's felt a bit like, you know, even when the other love interest, the teacher, she gets killed by the kind of, the little children. I think that was one of the scenes where I was kind of like, come on, it's two children, just kick them. Just get them off. Like, what are you doing? You're an adult. And that was, I think, one of the problems is that I never really kind of got on board with some of the deaths. But then I suppose that might be a problem with some of Cronenberg's films, in that, they are a little bit cold to some extent.
My favourite part about that classroom scene is when he discovers the body and just like puts that child's piece of paper over her face and just covers her up. It's like...
It's too late, mate.
Like,
they're traumatised.
So fun. They'd just written her off straight away. Didn't even call an ambulance. Just cover her up.
Mate, they were just hitting her with little wooden hammers. She's probably fine.
It's interesting, isn't it? So this is, again, something that Cronenberg himself has said when he's sort of looked back on his filmography. He said that Brood was the most classic horror film he's done. Do you kind of agree with that? I mean, I guess in some ways, I guess it kind of almost goes into a sort of slasher, doesn't it? Where if you think about the idea that it's a body count, really, film, isn't it? But with these little sort of monstrous dwarf children, I guess. But it sounds as though you didn't find it particularly sort of frightening or effective in a sort of horror way.
No, I didn't, except for some of the body horror stuff. So I should probably explain for people that haven't seen it. Some of the manifestations of Nola, they are these kind of off-brand versions of her actual daughter. That she kind of gives birth to. We'll get into that a bit later. Unfortunately, I just don't feel that the prosthetics, especially, lit up a lot during the film.
Yes,
did a great job, sort of making them seem scary.
Yes.
There was a lot of very kind of upfront shots of them near the end. It's like we started out kind of. Doing, you know, lots of sort of moody lighting and stuff like that, quick edits and stuff like that, and maybe it was because it was such a small production that they just didn't have the time to kind of make that work. But apart from the body horror stuff, 2 in particular, a lot of it didn't scare me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I couldn't help but think of Don't Look Now, Nick Rogue's Don't Look Now, with the little girl in the red, or the little dwarf in the red coat. I'm sure that must have been an influence for him. And sadly, it's not as scary as that moment in Don't Look Now, I think. That's the problem. And I just kept thinking, it's trying to be that, but it's not quite. And you're right. Yeah, it's like harsh lighting on these monsters in these moments of horror. And that's quite a strange decision. Again, there's that sort of clinical side to David Cronenberg, which I don't think always helps with the horror and the atmosphere sometimes. It's like, he could make it, like you said, if it was a little bit more moody maybe or something.
Yeah, I suppose, that, not wanting to be too kind of gothic in his portrayal of some of the characters and stuff like that, and to be a bit more clinical and medical about it. I see the decisions behind that, and maybe I suppose it's what the intent is at that time is like maybe he never intended for them to be kind of spooky in that sort of way, but just kind of matter of fact, like there's something wrong with these kids. Like, these are not normal children. That feels like that was the intent, and he certainly got that across. Yeah, those kids are not okay.
They're not okay. Yeah, so we should say, so it's essentially like it's the trauma that Nola is basically kind of re-experiencing, which is the trauma of her own childhood, isn't it? Where she was physically abused by her mother, and her father was sort of an alcoholic and very passive and sort of let it happen. I think that's the kind of what they suggest is the deal. So it's her parents initially, isn't it, who are the first two victims? It's her mum who is killed. I was a bit confused as to why the mum was allowed to babysit for her daughter, considering she was clearly this abusive mother. I thought that was quite weird.
Sure. I got confused by that bit because I was like, wait, her?
Yeah.
not that you have to be like a snarling monster on the surface to do that sort of thing. But I was like, I sort of found it a bit difficult to kind of like, well, no, that has to be someone else. And then, no, I suppose it was the mother.
It was her, and I can kind of get on board with that, except that she was also letting her mother now babysit for her daughter. I thought that's a weird move to make. But anyway,
well, not for long.
Yeah, not for long. So anyway, she's murdered and then the dad is murdered, and they are, like we said, they look like children, almost like either they're representations of Nola when she was a child, or they are kind of weird bastardized versions of their own child, their own little daughter, who looks kind of like she looks kind of like the monsters, doesn't she, the daughter, because the daughter wears a red coat and everything as well.
It's most effective when there's right at the end when there's loads of them. And they're kind of shot further back, and then it's more like a bit of a swarm. Like a kind of like a horde of them. Then it starts. Then like the stakes like get higher, and I kind of really felt like, ooh, okay, all right, now it's dangerous. Now there's a lot of them.
I think that the last act of this film is phenomenal. I think it's what makes the film, it puts the film on a higher level, I think, because of the last maybe 30 minutes of this film is like proper edge of your seat, gross, tense, suspenseful horror stuff, isn't it? And weird.
I cannot stress enough how weird the ending of this film is.
So let's talk. I want to hear what your reaction was. So that we're talking about obviously the moment that it's revealed where these kind of monstrous children come from, right? Which is where we go to this weird cabin in the woods, and Oliver Reed and the dad kind of go there to rescue the little girl and take her away to safety. She's upstairs in bed. Oliver Reed says, I'll go upstairs and rescue the daughter. You go and keep the wife, distracted. He goes upstairs to the attic. Meanwhile, the dad goes into this living room, sees his wife, Nola, and Nola is wearing this kind of like white gown thing, isn't she? And she's sat in this kind of like meditative sort of posture, and she suddenly goes, look, and she lifts up her dress, and we see this, what looks like a kind of an external womb, isn't it? It's like a womb that is on the outside of her body, and then it progresses into this really grotesque moment where it kind of gives birth to a fetus. She takes the fetus out and she kind of licks it. I mean, what was your reaction to this then?
So my favourite moment of this film was he had the husband had to go and talk to Nola. To try and buy some time so Oliver Reed could go and save the daughter who was being kind of like had been kidnapped by the sort of the not children. And it's actually quite funny when I think about it. It's because he's doing a really good job of kind of sort of emoting with his wife and kind of going, oh no, we can figure something out. It's fine. I'm not going to leave you. And then she goes, yeah, well, what about this? And his reaction was exactly the same as mine, which was just, wah! Like, what the fuck is that? And it just, what's great about it is it's like, because she can kind of almost like psychically control the children that she's produced in this time.
Yes, they basically like react to her emotions, don't they? Essentially, yeah.
And as soon as he just cannot hide his disgust, and she gets really upset again, and all of a sudden it's like it was a great little. I love it when in movies and like TV and stuff that it's like 2 or 3 separate things matter, even though they're not happening at the same location.
Yeah.
It's really satisfying when it's like all of the things need to come together for the plan to work out.
Yeah.
And it was a great little moment where it's like, right, Oliver Reed is fucked.
Yes.
And this guy's got to, swallow, like, fucking sort of shit out and convince her to calm down, basically. And he isn't able to do it. And, like, how could he?
Yeah.
Because the effects are so good. I was thinking about this bit when I was eating earlier and I had to put my food down. I think the thing that fucked me up so much about it is, so it's this scene and the bit where the father meets another patient who's got some huge tumor.
Oh my god!
Neck.
Oh my god! Yeah,
We've not even talked about
I can't believe we haven't even talked about that. Yeah, and that again, it's the same thing, right? It's that he underwent that same therapy, and his trauma, his repressed memories, have physically manifested into these like tumors that have come out of his neck, and it is so kind of creepy and weird at that moment when he reveals it. I didn't quite know how to react to it. It's just like, ooh, because
you're just not prepared for it at all. At no point did I think, people back in the sort of 70s and 80s, they wore towels when they worked out around their neck all the time. Everyone's seen Rocky, and also he's such a weird actor as well.
He was so
he's
weird.
In Scanners also. I'm becoming a bit of a fan of this, to be honest. And just when he pulls this thing out, and it's like, again, it's done. It's so well done because it's subtle, and I can imagine something like that happen to a human body.
Yes.
It's not outside. It's not like it's not sprouting, spider legs out of his back or something like that. The crazy shit that happens in the thing. It was just. And it was almost made me feel bad because I was like, shit, if someone did that to me in real life, I'd probably have the same reaction.
Yeah.
And I'd feel awful as a result.
Yeah.
But the stuff with when the mother reveals her sack at the end of the film, it's weird because also on film you kind of expect that stuff, I think to hide like inconsistencies or kind of too much rubbery texture, that people just slather these effects like in goo, to hide some like little kind of inconsistencies, like little seams here and there. But the sack as it starts out is actually quite dry looking.
Yes.
And it seemed so much more believable as a result. And it's like, it really looked real. And also just the way that she kind of lifts up her dress, and it's like very kind of I don't know, it's like something out of a painting or something.
Yes, it
just
is.
That one shot.
It is.
It's just so it was fucking seared into my mind, and it's not going anywhere else. Like, it's there now. It was so affecting, and when you think it's okay, and then she cracks it open, and obviously no expense was spared on the fake blood. Because it just looks so... She's getting all over her fucking face, and then there's like the little fetus.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's so funny. You you messaged me being like, I'm just watching The Brood, and I just audibly gasped. And I was like, but it's true. It's that moment, isn't it? You're right. It's those little details, like it's kind of dry on the outside, as maybe you'd expect something like that to be. I suppose if an internal organ was put on the outside of the body, it would kind of dry up and go kind of scaly or something.
Yeah.
And then it's so wet and squishy on the inside that it's just, it is. And you're right, I think it's masterful, this whole set piece, because of the way Cronenberg cuts between the action upstairs and the action downstairs. And exactly like you said, that the more he's reacting with disgust to her body, the more psychologically upset she's becoming, and then the more angry the little dwarf monsters upstairs are getting. And it's really cleverly kind of cut together as a montage where you've got these two people arguing downstairs, and they have no idea that they're endangering their daughter upstairs. And again, it's so clever because it works. This is where it peaks, right? Because the subtext and the text and the horror, because what we've got here is a classic kind of divorced parents family setup where we're in this little home. We've got these two parents who are going at each other's throats, this oblivious husband who has no idea that he is really hurting his wife's feelings, and the wife getting very, very upset. These two arguing and getting each other upset and worked up is unintentionally damaging their daughter upstairs. And it's a really clever thing. It's like one of those, scenes that you would see play out in a real life drama where a little kid is overhearing his parents argue, right? And they're getting upset by it, or they're damaged by it, or whatever. And it kind of feels like it's that in a kind of monstrous, literal way here, where they have no idea that this divorce isn't just affecting them as people, it's also affecting their daughter, and neither of them have any idea.
God, Nola.
No, I disgust you. I sicken you. You hate me. You didn't come here because you love me. You came here to take our daughter away and give her to somebody else.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to you.
I love it how, meanwhile, upstairs, those monsters are becoming more and more aggressive, and Oliver Reed is just looking more and more worried.
His expression is brilliant. His expression during I could just watch that man all day. He was just like, literally, he just got it so right. His expression was like, oh fuck, okay, all right, careful now, easy steps, and then I think he could have taken out a few of the kids. With him, he seems to get overwhelmed quite quickly.
I know. Were you also thinking? I was thinking what I would do, and whether or not I could kick, whether I could kick some of them, or just like throw some of them across the room.
How many children would it take to overpower them? And I don't know. You had the bunk beds, and it was quite enclosed space. I reckon. Just sort of realised that someone just like jumps into this episode right now. It's me talking about how I'd handle beating children up. We're on topic.
We're on topic, exactly.
There's a reason for this. But no, I think, and also, there's something going on with the children where they can do this sort of stuff. So I believe it. But he could have gotten... Oh, no, he did shoot a couple... Oh, actually, no, he did shoot a couple of them.
Yes, he did.
And it was like the fucking handgun was a shotgun. I just remembered that now, I love it when they do that in movies. It's like that's not how guns work.
It's actually quite satisfying, isn't it? Though when he shoots a couple of them,
because they're really irritating. As well, because they don't say anything. They killed some really they killed the teacher, who was a really nice character. And she was. Do you know? I loved the bit in the film where she actually says to the husband, like, I'm not getting involved in this.
Fuck this. I'm leaving. Whoa.
So many times in movies, the love interest will kind of, despite any kind of, intelligence, just go ahead with something that's definitely going to get them killed. And I loved that she was just like, no thanks.
No, peace out. It's true. I did feel sorry for her, really. But I think it's like you said, those earlier scenes where they're attacked by just one of those evil children is less scary. But there's something about seeing them all... And they kind of move in unison. They sit up in the bed and they all come towards him as a pack. That is really frightening, I think. It reminds me of it's like a pack of animals, isn't it? Stalking a prey, because they don't attack instantly. They kind of slowly surround him and come towards him as well. It's quite well done. Yeah.
It is. And when they start to attack the daughter, and they're actually smashing their hands through the door.
Yeah.
And they really start grabbing the young girl, actually. And it was actually, it's always going to be really affecting when you see like a kid in danger on film. It's like, when you see in Danny in The Shining and his shirt is ripped and he's got like marks on his neck. There's something about that. I always just want to jump into the screen and just whisk him away and like get him to safety. But the now that we sort of talked about that, obviously David Cronenberg had gone through a divorce. The ending is like a little bit like, you're right there, Dave. Because he just there's no kind of there's nothing sort of fantastic about the actual ending because he just strangles her.
Yes.
And and I was a bit like, oh god, this is a little.
He's working through some stuff, I think. There, Cronenberg.
It felt a bit like it. This, it's not as creative as putting someone in a bear and burning them. Like or Ari. This is just. I can just imagine David Cronenberg behind the camera during that scene.
Yeah.
Just like
keep going. I wonder what his ex-wife thought of The Brood. I wonder if she saw it and what she thought of it.
Probably happy with her decisions.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's not great. It doesn't paint his ex-wife in the best light, really, does it? In a way, but also we're kind of the main character who's supposed to be David Cronenberg or a version of is so wet anyway that neither of them really come off in the best light. And then there's that interesting as well. There's that interesting question, I guess, throughout the whole film as to is Nola actually maybe physically abusing her child? And we don't really know for certain one way or the other because this child definitely seems she's basically mute throughout the whole film, isn't she? And she definitely seems like she's something like some kind of trauma has happened to her, and you don't know whether that's just the events of the film and the evil little monstrous children that's doing that, or whether there's something else. And then we're left with that final shot, which is quite chilling, where she has the kind of weird sort of lesions, those weird sort of marks on her, suggesting that the same thing might happen to her eventually, sort of thing, like it's repeating itself again.
My kind of takeaway from the sort of physical manifestations of trauma is that that's exactly what it is, and depending on how traumatized you are, the more kind of physical the outcome is. And we all know now that anyone that kind of suffers like trauma as a child, they probably are likely to grow up without working through that stuff. With working with that trauma in really unhealthy ways. And I really like that last shot because it was, whether it's just isolated to her being traumatized by the events of the film, or being, because also I don't think we go into what actually lands the wife in therapy in the first place. So it could have very well have been that she was, exposed as abusing her daughter and then having to go to therapy. But I really thought it was like the kind of that first sort of seed had been sown of trauma in the daughter, which I thought was a really great shot to end on.
So good. I really think it really ramps up, and I think it's like, I guess this is the case with so many of Cronenberg's early films, and he was working with super small budgets, and his films are in some ways the ideas are so good, even if they're better than the execution of them sometimes, And I think the concept of this film, that psychological trauma is turned into a monster movie, is a really cool idea, I think. And this movie is so much fun. It's got some absolutely wonderful horror sequences in there, the ones we've already discussed. There are moments of it that I wish I would just that could just be slightly improved. I think increase that horror throughout the bulk of the first act and first two acts maybe of the film, and also maybe if they'd had a slightly more interesting main protagonist,
get a guy with more charisma. Fair enough, David, he's meant to be a kind of sort of a version of you, but give us a bit of Goldblum.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of Walken.
Yeah. Well, last week we talked about Eraserhead and how Jack Nance's character, the main character in Eraserhead, is kind of supposed to be David Lynch, really. David Lynch's kind of fear of fatherhood and everything. Actually, isn't it interesting? Aren't they an interesting pair to look at in so many ways? These kind of slightly surreal genre takes on men's fears, really. You've got, men's fears ideas of wombs, of reproduction, of commitment. It's really interesting. I mean, they're so different, these two films, but they are juggling a lot of the same themes. But yeah, I think going back to what we were saying, I think Jack Nance, even though he has very little to do as well, a little bit like the main character in this film, Jack Nance's character, Henry, is also very passive. He also doesn't really do anything. It's just that stuff sort of happens to him. But even so, look at the way he looks. He's so striking looking. He's so weird. And even when Jack Nance isn't doing anything and is just staring off into space, he is so much more magnetic and watchable and interesting than, let's be honest, the main character in The Brood. And I think just because of the way that David Lynch kind of injects this weird surrealism into every element of his films, even the most mundane moments, David Cronenberg doesn't do that. David Cronenberg is very much going for realism, I think, a kind of cold realism and naturalism, which is great because, in many ways that can make a story more effective because you believe in it and you're invested in it.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, his films can, and again, we've said this a bunch of times, but his films can have that slight clinical coldness which don't draw me in as much.
And that works really well with some stuff. But I'd be interested to know what cinematographers he uses, because I feel like The Fly, the shots and everything was so much more
so different. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm sure that must come into it as well. Depending on what kind of a team you have around you, you can really kind of your kind of hidden talents can shine a bit more.
Yeah.
And but some of his really early stuff I thought was terrific. Shivers is brilliant, and I think that worked really well. It was really low budget, but and I think that sort of the coldness works for that one because also there was a lot of characters in it as well, which I think if you're not going to get too emotional with any one character, having lots of characters can work quite well, I think
so. And there's something quite, I think deliberately so, but quite dour looking about some of his films. These kind of 70s brutalist kind of Canadian buildings. I don't know, there's just something a little bit dull in the sort of, dull as in in the sort of looks wise about it, dull color palette. Even Shivers, everything is kind of quite muted and sort of beige and white and stuff, and it's quite interesting.
But when the red when the red comes in though, that's when it shines.
Yes,
that's what we were talking about before, where he can hold back on certain things. So when the shit hits the fan, it is strong. It is right. It really hits you.
Hello? Mom?
I don't like this. Dad, I don't like this.
What's happening?
Please stop.
What's going on? Mom!
Please, you're really freaking me out. Please stop.
What's
Dad,
happening? Why is everyone scared? Why are you scaring me?
Make it stop! Make it fucking stop! Make it stop! Stop it! Please stop! Now make it stop!
You're scaring me!
Hello, everybody. That was a little clip you just heard there from one of course, the creepiest moments in one of the scariest movies to come out of the last decade. That is, of course, Ari Aster's phenomenal Hereditary. And that's a little hint of what we've got going on over on Patreon in the next few days. Very excitingly, over on Patreon in the last couple of months, we've been asking every single person who signed up to vote for their scariest moments in horror. These moments could be from a film, they could be from a TV show, they could be from an advert or commercial, it could be a music video, doesn't really matter. It could be from a kid's cartoon even, just whatever has scared you the most. And we have collated the results. Well, I say we, it's actually down to the wonderful friend of the pod and Patreon subscriber Rebecca McCallum, who actually collated all of the hundreds of lists and results for me. So thank you so much, Rebecca. She has collated all the results and they are now in. And oh my God, it's so exciting. What an incredible collection of moments from films and TV shows, etc. Over on Patreon this week, we are going to start our official countdown, the scariest ever moments in horror as voted for by you. So that's going to be kicking off for $5 patrons and $10 patrons later on this week. If you want to sign up and listen to that countdown, as well as a whole back catalogue of other bonus episodes, then you can. Just head on over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, and for the very reasonable price of $5 per month, you will get treated to regular bonus content at least every couple of weeks. Or if you want, and you can afford to, you can go up to our $10 level, which means you'll get an episode every single week, and you will have access to, as well as this horror countdown, you'll have access to our exclusive bonus mini-seasons, including a season on Twin Peaks, which we brought you a new episode of that this week, in which me and Rob Watts discussed the latter half of season 2 and that incredible finale in the Black Lodge, and also an exclusive mini-season on Cinema of the Extreme, which is going to kick off in a couple of weeks' time. So loads and loads of different options. Get involved. Patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, and if you sign up at either tier, $5 or $10, you will get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker if you're UK based, and you'll get a very special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thanks. So, a big thank you to Ray Newman, Eric Renaud, Chandler Bullock, Mary Havam, May Helena Frank, Aileen DeRode, Cameron McMurdy, Patrick Bennett, Annie J, Tracy Haichu, and Nicola Richards. A huge thank you to all of those brilliant people. Thank you so much for donating and contributing to Evolution of Horror. All of your support is hugely appreciated. And one more time, if you want to get involved, help support the making of this podcast and be treated to regular bonus content, and find out what patrons have voted the scariest moment of all time, get involved. Patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Okay, now we're heading into the second half of our discussion, and we are going to talk about the bonkers Scanners from 1981.
I would like to scan all of you in this room, one at a time. I must remind you that the scanning experience is usually a painful one, sometimes resulting in nosebleeds, earaches, stomach cramps, nausea, sometimes other symptoms of a similar nature. At this point, I'd like to call for volunteers. Fine. Just sit right here, please. Now, I'd like you to think of something specific.
Do I have to close my eyes?
It doesn't matter.
All right, yes, I have something.
The mind force. Scanners. Their thoughts can kill.
The plot of Scanners is... Okay, well, first of all, I'm just going to preface this by saying that Scanners is a really interesting film in that it has one of my favourite subjects in film ever, which is telekinesis, psychic powers, and my least favourite, which is corporate espionage.
Yes.
Which I fucking hate. There's that film with Clive Owen called The International, and I've never seen it because I just know I'll absolutely hate it. Okay, Scanners is about a guy with special abilities who is homeless because these abilities make it very difficult for him to kind of form any cohesive thoughts. And when he, by mistake, sort of accidentally hurts a woman with his psychic powers in a shopping centre, he is sort of caught by a company. I don't know what the company does.
Yeah.
But they need psychic people to help them. And he is basically brought into this kind of world of psychic spies and espionage. And, you know, what you need from a spy is someone with quite a lot of charisma. And unfortunately, with our lead character, Cameron, it's a good thing he's psychic.
Yeah.
Because, he's not convincing anyone to let him go anywhere without those powers.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, let's start by talking about the acting in this film. And it's mainly whatever the main guy is called. I need to find his name. It's Stephen Lack. It's mainly Stephen Lack who plays Cameron Vale, who is, I can only assume it must be deliberate, but he's like a zombie. He's like, he barely emotes, and he's so wooden to the point of like distracting, I think. And I just kept thinking the whole way through the film, because also some of the other acting style as well is so weird, and I was thinking maybe this is a deliberate choice on Cronenberg's part, something to do with because of these people are like telekinetic, that everything's kind of going on inside their head and there's not much going on the outside or something. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on Stephen Lack's performance in this?
Oh, I don't want to be mean. I don't have a lot of good things to say about Stephen Lack's performance, I'm afraid. I wanted to find out how he got the job.
Yeah.
Actually. And David Lynch has, what's his name? Carl McLachlan. And Carl McLachlan in June, when they first worked together, I think wasn't an amazing actor. No. But, I think that they just kind of got each other. And I listened to a podcast with Stephen Lack about, how they got together. Because I always assumed that it was like, because Stephen Lack is also an artist, and he's actually quite an accomplished artist. Uh-huh. And I thought it might have something to do with that, but it turns like, it seems like David Cronenberg kind of just wanted to take a chance on him, and he just really got along with him, and just kind of liked the cut of his jibs, I suppose. That's how Stephen Lack described it anyway on a podcast I listened to a couple of days ago, and he seems like a really, really lovely guy, and it might be one of those things where. Oh God, one of my favourite stories from a film production ever is the guy that directed Dracula, the one with Keanu Reeves.
Oh yeah, Francis Ford Coppola.
That's it, yeah. And he said that he couldn't bring himself to Reeves how bad his English accent was because he was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
And, maybe that there was some element of that with this where... I don't know. It's probably... Oh, God, I feel bad saying this. It's probably some of the worst acting I've seen. Like, it's super distracting. It's really, really distracting to the point where I don't think it is a stylistic thing. I just think that, filmmaking, you sometimes need to make concessions. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. It's really... I think it was... I've read that it was apparently a difficult production. Again, Cronenberg has called Scanners one of his most difficult films to make. He said that there was an incomplete script when they started shooting. A lack of constructed sets. He was apparently spending mornings prior to filming actually writing those scenes that they were going to be filming that day. And I do think that the film... I do enjoy the film, but it does feel like a bit of a mess, doesn't it? I think it's a bit all over the place.
It is a bit all over the place. The main thing to take away from this film is that Michael Ironside is fucking brilliant. I just love Michael Ironside in this film, and if we're sort of talking about the other performances, I love films about psychic powers, and there was like a huge amount of them, like in the sort of 70s and 80s. It seemed like a real subject that people were interested in. And in every film about psychic powers, there has to be shots of people pretending that they're using their psychic powers, which is basically just, right, you're using your psychic powers, and everyone's got a different way to do it, which is just amazing. And
it's always like squinting your eyes and like...
And then there's the other people that have to act like their brains are about to fucking explode or something, which is great. And it's just, there are so many shots of people just like pretending to convulse, and everyone's got their own little... And the way to do it is to just not fucking care if you look like an idiot or not. And Michael Ironside was making the weirdest fucking faces, but I believe I bought his more than anything, because I was like, yeah, I guess if you're really straining, you're going to make some odd faces. Whereas Cameron Vale, Stephen Lack, he seemed a little more resistant to...
Oh god, it's so funny.
It is.
The moment when there is that like sort of battle between various different scanners. I even sent you a video clip of it last night as I was watching it, because I was howling with laughter, just cutting between all of these faces, all just kind of gurning and convulsing and doing different things each. And I get it must be such a hard thing to visualize. Like you said, it's like, how do you visualize people fighting with each other psychically or telepathically, because nothing is actually physically happening. And it's a really interesting thing, because David Cronenberg is such a physical filmmaker. Like, The Brood is all about all of those kind of internal psychic things being manifested on the outside. But he doesn't really do that with scanners, and so he's relying on people's just sort of looks and eyes and faces. And yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't. It's so strange.
It is. I think that this film has got such a broad spectrum of good acting to bad acting, and it can really jar. And my favourite... Oh, no, we'll get into that at the end, because I know you want to talk about the ending in a bit, but that's my favourite bit of the film. That's the problem is, if you look at Sissy Spacek in Carrie, when she's using her, that is just so masterfully done. And I love also the kind of like a split screen effect as well in it. There's like a rhythm and like a way to kind of show off psychic power. God, like honestly, I really do love psychic powers in movies.
I love it.
And I remember I got in touch with you a while ago because I'd watched a film called Thelma, which is I want to say it's Norwegian, but yeah, it's a film about a young girl with psychic powers, and the way it would like build up the music and the noise and the editing would just be perfect for the psychic, and it would take a while to build up these kind of surges of psychic energy, and it really, really worked. And it works really well in Carrie because it's just one incident where the psychic powers every incident is big. But in Scanners, unfortunately, it didn't have the kind of the use of like CGI and things like that to make things float around and everything like that. So a lot of the, it's horrible when there's some shots where someone is being like blown away by like a psychic blast, but it's clearly them like throwing themselves.
But actually, do you know what? Carrie's the perfect example, which we covered. That Carrie is where in a way it's Brian De Palma that does the heavy lifting, right? It's not really the genius. The genius thing about Carrie is that Sissy Spacek barely does anything. She just like flicks her eyes to the side very subtly or naturally. But the camera is doing so much, whether it's a split screen or whether it's music or whether it goes and goes in on her eyes. Brian De Palma manages to use all of the tricks in the book to make it look like she's doing something with her mind, when actually Sissy Spacek doesn't have to do much. Whereas, again, David Cronenberg has that slightly more removed, distant kind of eye, I think. And maybe it just doesn't quite work for this or something. I don't know.
No, it's unless you can physically on set with like wires and stuff like that show it, you have to use editing techniques and you have to use the magic of cinema to get these things across. And I'm sure if there was more budget and CGI and stuff like that, maybe with like that kind of more clinical approach, you could do something good. I mean, there's one really good scene in this movie, which is I watched it again just to sort of remind myself, and it is just so perfect in its like build up to the kind of we're talking about the head explosion, by the way.
Of course.
And that sequence is beautiful. It's so well done with the kind of you just don't know what's going on here, and then it's just you're supposed to be just like this little kind of I might like lift a coin up or something, or I'm going to read someone's thoughts, and before you know it, someone's fucking head has just exploded everywhere, and possibly one of the greatest head explosions ever.
It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? That happens right at the beginning of the film as well. I always forget how early on that is in the film. It is genius, actually, and despite everything we've just said about some of the clunkier scenes of the sort of telepathy that happen later on, this one is pulled off perfectly, isn't it? Like the build-up, like you said, that build-up of music, of him kind of convulsing. We've been told beforehand that one of the characters says, oh, we're about to scan you. It might make your nose bleed. It might make your ears ache. So, you're expecting maybe to suddenly see him get a nosebleed or something, but you're not expecting what you then see, which is this incredible... and it's probably one of the most iconic shots in Cronenberg's whole career, I think, probably. Everyone knows Scanners as the head explosion film, don't they, really?
It's a shame that this scene happens so early on, because it's not great that a film peaks in the first, and boy does it peak. I mean, it is amazing, this shot. And it's like, honestly, it's like, even with like CGI and special effects and all the stuff that we have now, I've never seen anyone do better than this.
No. It's part of that amazing early 80s practical latexy kind of vibe that all of these movies have. I think it was Dick Smith who did the effects for it, who he obviously famously did the Exorcist. He made the Reagan head spinning, spewing. He's the one that came up with all of that stuff. He was saying, I've got a quote here from him talking about the head explosion. He said he basically made a plaster skull exterior from latex scraps, bits of wax, bits and bops of stringy stuff that they found around the set. Leftover burgers and bits of meat were put inside it as well to give it the kind of desired texture. They rolled the cameras, they got inside trucks with doors and windows closed, proceeded to lie down behind the dummy, and then literally fired a gun into the back of it to make it explode. Amazing.
How do you top that? Because you wouldn't be allowed to do that now.
No. Can you imagine the health and safety problems with doing that? With lying on the floor and just shooting an actual gun up in the air towards a dummy.
Just close the door. It'll be fine. Just look away.
Oh my god. It really is an incredible moment, isn't it? And the whole film after that, despite just saying about how everything before this film that Cronenberg had made was quite clinical, this film is weird. I don't know if I was maybe in a particularly kind of dazed state last night when I watched it at midnight, but it felt like I was watching some sort of dream. The music and the acting style, and some of those scenes, like that moment when that crazy sort of battle scene happens, and it's in a kind of art studio, and there's a giant plaster head and stuff. I thought, I actually really like some of those. Again, quite different to what we've just been saying about Cronenberg, that there was some slightly weirder visual choices in this one that I actually quite enjoyed.
I really loved the art installation stuff. That some of the stuff there I thought was really, really interesting, just visually to look at. We do spend quite a lot of time, in this kind of state of people having psychic reactions to things and that. So a lot of the the sounds and the scenes in the film are kind of a bit in a daze, because when these people are using these powers, it's just they're all over the fucking place. I wish we could have stayed more with some of the more kind of interesting metaphysical stuff. I really like it when they go and meet the kind of underground scanners group, and they kind of all try and bond their minds together. And I really thought that was really interesting. And then, no, we've got to go back to corporate espionage. Let's go to a factory now.
I know. You're right. It's in some ways it's the actual kind of story arc that lets it down a bit. This kind of there's this rival corporate company that are stealing the scanners and stuff, and it's I don't really know if I care about that. And it's like you said, an interesting mix of actors. Michael Ironside, who you mentioned, who plays Revok, who's kind of, I suppose, the villain. I suppose he's the bad scanner, isn't he? He's got a freaky look about him. He's got a great face.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And then we've also got Dr. Paul Ruth, who's played by Patrick McGoohan, who is quite an interesting, reminded me a bit of the Oliver Reed character in The Brood, where he's this kind of authoritative doctor, but you don't know actually if he's maybe bad or how good or bad his intentions are, because he's a bit sinister. Obviously he's very sinister in places, but
he was. I liked his character, and it's actually when you say that he's quite similar to the Oliver Reed character, where it's like not like a moustache twirling villain or anything, but certainly the source of a lot of problems.
Yes,
he gets his comeuppance. So I suppose we are kind of supposed to think that it's deserved potentially, but I don't know. Like, he's never Oliver Reed and this character are never kind of portrayed as villainous, and I suppose at the end, neither is Michael Ironside's character to some extent. Because they're all the scanners are all kind of victims of being experimented on. Yeah,
it's kind of like that Magneto thing, isn't it? It's like, how much of a villain is he really because of the way he's been treated and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You put someone like Ian McKellen in the role, just love him.
I know, love him. And I guess in some ways this is the first Cronenberg film. If we look at what he's done previously, there's like Shivers, Rabid, The Brood, very much body-based, whereas this is the first one that starts to tease the idea of like machines and people and technology, which is something that he comes back to again and again, I think, with Videodrome, with Existenz, with whatever it is, like this idea of people melding with machines. And there's that whole idea in this that, you're a scanner, you can also scan a computer and all of that kind of stuff.
I really hate that sequence.
It's just, I think for people like me and you who love like visceral, moody horror, we're again not interested in computer hacking and espionage, right?
There's nothing cinematic about computers. Nothing.
No.
There is actually a really great bit in it when Cameron is in a phone booth. So he rings a company and he uses his psychic powers to go down the phone line and get into the corporation's computer, which is as dumb as it sounds. And so, I'm trying not to be cruel about this film, but there are some bits that that bother me. And what happens is it's a really odd little sequence where it's like three scientists in this lab, in this like computer room, kind of saying, we'll have to shut it down. And they try and build up some suspense because there's like the sort of boss's like right-hand man in there. And he's like, you better do this or I'll shoot you. And I don't know who these characters are. I don't care. And so they say, fine, we'll shut it down. And there's just this bit where there's absolutely no noise. There's no music. There's nothing. Yeah. And it's just really, it's like, what the fuck is even? And he goes, well, what's going on? And one of the scientists kind of says something on the lines of like, well, they're just computers. They're, what do you expect? And I was like, I don't know, make some anything. I don't know, just anything. And there is a great gag when the guy goes, I suppose they're worried about the computers blowing up or something. And there is quite a good kind of bit of a comedy gag where one of the scientists, after it's been shut down, kind of goes, that's all it was then. And then it just fucking explodes. And it was like the comedy timing was really good on that one. I did really like that.
Yeah. I know it is. It's never a great thing, is it? It's never great to have people looking at computers, people hacking into computers. It's never going to be cinematic. It's the same as the case nowadays for people text messaging each other in films. It's like that's. It's never going to be exciting, unfortunately. Even in The Fly, some of my least favourite moments of The Fly are like Seth Brundle plus Fly equals Brundle Fly and all that stuff on the kind of green and black sort of Amstrad computer or whatever it is, It's so finally then, let's talk about the ending of Scanners. So we get this, a little bit like The Brood, we get this kind of reveal. So Stephen Lank's character, Cameron Vale, and Daryl Revock, these two powerful scanners, turn out to be brothers, right? And their dad is Dr. Paul Ruth, and it turns out that all of the people that are scanners were kind of given this injection when they were in the womb. Going back to wombs again, their mothers were given this drug, and it affected all their unborn babies and gave them these telekinetic powers, right? So these two are actually brothers all along, as we have this sort of final showdown. What do you think of that final sequence?
It's not like when Luke Skywalker finds out that Darth Vader's his father. You know, it's not. I was like, well, okay, sure,
okay,
all right,
yeah.
You know, it was a fun little sort of reveal, but it like maybe if we'd have found that out in like at the start of the third act, that would have been interesting, and they could have explored that a bit. But it's not really explored because what happens next is a psychic duel. Which does have some pretty great practical effects in it. I love it. I absolutely love it when Michael Ironside starts getting all these veins going up his arm, like they start to coagulate. What's such a clever little effect.
And like in his face and stuff as well. It's really cool.
So good. And that's when, again, like, you know, I see a bit of the flair come in with like some of the camera work and things like that. And, you know, it would have been nice to have seen it a bit more throughout the film. But I really, really enjoyed that. And, you know, maybe there could have been a bit more paper flying around and stuff like that. You could have had some people in the back shaking a desk.
Some strobing lights. I think some flickering lights is always good.
Just give me a little something. Just shake the set a bit. I again, it's all of the Michael Ironside shots are great. All of the Stephen Lack shots are just. He acts better when he's not having a good time.
Yes,
I believed it a bit more when he was like, "Oh, my face is like peeling off and stuff." That was good. I bought that. I think he's a better. I think unfortunately he doesn't. I think he's better when it's just kind of emoting. I feel like he's a little bit better at doing that than I don't know. It just sort of some of the line deliveries were just a little bit grating for me. So that last sequence I always thought was really good. But my favourite bit is when. So at the end, I guess what happens is Cameron sends his consciousness into Revik's.
Yes.
Because when Revik is like curled up in a corner at the end, I should point out that Cameron's body bursts into flames. And
yes, that's right.
Just fucking explodes. So it appears as though he's lost the psychic showdown. And when is it Jennifer?
Yes, Jennifer walks in and sees the body.
And he turns around and Michael Ironside's got blue contact lenses on, and it appears, I suppose, to show that Cameron is now in him. I love that Michael Ironside does an impression of Stephen Lack by the end. And he just gets this really kind of wet inflection in his voice, and I was like, I don't know if you needed to do that, because it just kind of again pointed out how jarring some of Stephen Lack's like line deliveries are in it.
It's me, Cameron. I'm here. We've won.
He just made himself look a bit more sort of blank, didn't he, as he was becoming poor Stephen Lang. And he says, we won. And again, I was a little bit confused. Who won? Who won there? Because, you know, it's not like the scanners in general, I suppose, is it? Because Revok was a scanner. Because I kind of thought at one point, are they just going to team up because they're brothers? And they turned out maybe the corporations are going to be the bad guys all along. But I don't know. They still ended up killing each other. So
maybe they're both in that body.
Ah, yeah, maybe.
Maybe they
one's lost their body, the other's lost their mind by the end.
Well, actually, I suppose thinking about it, there's that one sequence when they're all going to try and bring their consciousness together into one consciousness.
Yes.
Maybe that is something that has happened. I'm not sure. I know that there's a sequel. I don't think David Cronenberg did that. So maybe they go into a bit more of that in that film. I haven't heard good things though. So
no,
I probably won't.
Me neither. Me neither. There's a second and third one. I've not seen any. And a remake was announced in 2007, but as of now, it's still not actually gone into production yet. So who knows about that?
I'd rather see a remake of The Brood. I think there's a lot of rich stuff in there. You know,
yeah.
Like a remake, a bit like the Suspiria remake, where the original Suspiria. It's very visceral. There's not like that much sort of story in it, but then obviously the remake had tons of story, maybe a little bit too much.
Too much, yeah.
But I could see a 2-hour film really exploring some of the more kind of like psychological stuff that happens in The Brood. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, it probably would actually. Did you ever watch the Soska sisters remake of Rabbids? Did you watch that?
I did, and I really. I suppose I play too many video games, but in like games like Resident Evil, the monster at the end is always massive and terrifying, and I did really, really dig that the kind of there was like this kind of crazy monster stuck up against a wall or something at the end of that. I really, really dug that. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that monster. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, I don't know whether, like you said, how much it kind of plays to the film's strengths that it turns out these two characters are brothers. Apparently, a lot of people have made various different interpretations of the film. There was an issue of the film publication Cine Action that looked at the film in light of Cronenberg's use of allegories and parables and said the argument is made that Cronenberg uses iconic imagery that refers directly and indirectly to 30-something scanners as 1960s political radicals, counterculture hippies, and as a result, the film can be seen as an oblique reflection on what might happen if the counterculture takes over and becomes the dominant culture. I mean, I personally never saw that interpretation in the film, but, interesting.
I couldn't possibly comment.
No.
I was doing my own little scan expression there.
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to process before your head explodes. Yeah, I know. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure that, David Cronenberg is such a smart guy, and I'm sure he probably had all kinds of really interesting conceptual ideas for this film that maybe just not all of them, for whatever reason, whether it was the acting, whether it was the rushed production, not all of it maybe came across as well as it could have.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Unfortunately, for anyone making like a film about psychics and psychic powers and stuff, there's that anime exists called Akira, where it's like no budget on earth can match what happens in that film with like, if we want to talk about body horror, this character's body can't contain the kind of psychic power in it anymore, and he turns into this kind of giant amoeba like creature. Until we can do that on film, that's where I like to go for my psychic fun.
So there we go. I hope we didn't sound too negative about those films, because I think there's a hell of a lot that we loved in both those films. Yes. I think, isn't there?
There is,
but they're both just quite interestingly flawed films in places, I guess, aren't they?
Well, they both. I mean, look, Scanners will stand the test of time because of that one sequence. That is what it has brought something to cinema, which in the decades since still hasn't actually been topped, which is like as like a kind of a technical feat, amazing. And honestly, I implore everyone to go and watch The Brood, because that last sequence is fucking gnarly. It is really, really something. And it's like, that's great. That's what I come and watch horror for. I want to be kind of shocked, and I want that kind of experience. Yeah,
you're so right. I mean, how often do you watch films nowadays that actually make you gasp like The Brood did?
Exactly. No, it really did. It really did.
Yeah. I love it. Amazing. Well, that's pretty much it. My final questions for you then. First of all, what's your favourite body horror?
Oh, God. What is my favourite body horror? Surely... Well, I guess no. Does The Thing count as a body horror?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
I mean, it kind of... In fact, I think the term was even coined from The Thing. I think that was where body horror came from.
Well,
so
there we go. It's probably The Thing in that case.
Nice. What's your favourite psychological horror?
Well, I suppose I know that The Babadook is technically a ghost film, but that also deals, there is like a pretty good argument you could make that the Babadook is all in the mother's head. And it's like a wonderful allegory about kind of, mental health and grief. And the idea that the ghost isn't kind of dissipated at the end, that you have to kind of keep a check on it. That is, that for me is just... It's second to none. It's one of my favourite horror films in general, anyway. To be fair, I'm sure there's a lot of, in the seasons coming along, I'm sure there's probably, a lot... if there's, a monster season down the line, I'll just say The Thing again.
Yeah, or The Babadook even,
Yeah. Well, that actually could be a physical monster, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Well, do you know what? The best films are the ones that could be all of these things, aren't they? That's the thing. That's why The Babadook is so amazing. That's why The Thing is so good. Amazing. Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
No, of course. Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you out there? Some more of your work and your art and everything like that out there online.
Okay, so sort of most easily, I am at Mike Lee Graham on Twitter, and I've started a Patreon recently making horror comics, and you can find the links there, or it's Mike Lee Graham on Patreon as well, which, if you like horror comics and weird shit, and a lot of it's mostly weird, come along and have a look.
I love it. Thank you very much. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Mike Lee Graham. So please do get in touch. What did you think of this week's episode, and what do you think of this week's films, The Brood and Scanners? I'm not 100% sure how I feel about Scanners, but I loved The Brood. Do you agree with me? Please do get in touch. evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Don't forget, Letterboxd is where you will find out all of the films that we're covering this series, so you can make yourself a little to-watch list and keep up with our discussions. If you want to discuss this week's films and anything else horror-related with fellow listeners, join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and that can be found on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast and help us with the cost of making the podcast, then sign up to our Patreon channel. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. And if you want to support this podcast but you can't afford to do so financially, then we would hugely appreciate an Apple Podcast rating or review. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Acast, Stitcher, Libsyn, and Spotify. You can find all previous episodes and seasons of this podcast on our website. Simply head on over to evolutionofhorror.com. Okay, onwards and upwards to next week then. We've got an absolute banger to discuss next week. One of my personal favourites. It's not to everybody's tastes. It's pretty out there, it's pretty weird, it's pretty intense, it's pretty extreme, but it's absolutely stunning. Next week, I'm going to be joined by none other than the Final Girls, Anna Bugatskaya, and we are going to be discussing Andrzej Zulawski's Possession from 1981. That's all we're going to be talking about, just the one film in nitty-gritty detail. There is so much to unpick. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.